Come up on stage. Yeah, that sounds good. So actually, we don't have any podiums, but that's okay. So we're just going to ask that Neil is going to make his opening statement. So please, sir.
So looking at the votes, I don't think I'm going to make many friends today, but I'm just going to dive right into it. I'd like everybody to think about how many times today you've used money. You probably took the subway to get here. You may have bought a coffee on the way. You probably paid for your TechCrunch ticket. You're using money a lot, right? So it's not a small problem that money is the problem that blockchain and Bitcoin was built to solve. The problem with money, to be specific, the problem with trust when it comes to money. Not database efficiency, not tracking identity, not tracking supply chains. Money. The idea behind Bitcoin, the reason it was invented, was that money today relies on too much trust. You trust PayPal to hold your money for you. You trust the banks to hold money for PayPal, and you trust the Federal Reserve to maintain the scarcity of your money supply. Events such as the financial crisis in 2008 and the decreasing value of your savings and your salaries leads many of us to believe that the trust that we've placed in these institutions and these companies has perhaps been misplaced. Bitcoin offers us an alternative. With Bitcoin, you own your Bitcoin. You don't have to trust someone to hold your Bitcoin for you. You no longer need to ask permission to send your Bitcoin somewhere else. The word blockchain means a lot of things to a lot of different people, to the point where blockchain is starting to become a nonsense word. I'm using the word today, blockchain, in the original sense of the word. Blocks with transaction data within them strung together in an immutable chain. This blockchain concept was invented along with Bitcoin mining together as a solution to the trust problem in digital currencies. Before Bitcoin, all the previous digital currencies had failed because they required a central authority to prevent people spending the coin twice. Every single time, these digital currencies failed because the central authority failed. The trust failed. This is called the double spend problem, and Bitcoin solved this. Bitcoin's success was built on this idea, and its ability to make people very, very rich, very, very quickly, has caused people to create a lot of copycats. People trying to emulate Bitcoin in the hope that they can get rich fast and catch up. The first example of copycats is private blockchains. I'm sure a lot of you have heard about private blockchains in the media. This is similar to the early days of the internet, when all the large corporates decided to start building their own intranets because they didn't trust people on the internet and they already had their own trusted parties. They preferred the control. We all know that didn't work. Blockchain on its own, without mining, without a native token, is just a highly inefficient database. I can tell you now that the corporate suits commissioning these blockchain projects do not understand blockchain whatsoever. They are driven purely by fear, fear that they're falling behind, fear that they're missing out, sheep mentality. This reality has been demonstrated over the past 3 years. Since blockchain became a thing, we have seen 0 successful implementations of blockchain outside of Bitcoin. 0. Pilot projects, laboratories, letters of intent, partnerships do not count. I hope Zennon brings some of them up. I would argue that blockchain is already going out of fashion. Banks don't talk publicly about blockchain much anymore, and neither do the startups founded on blockchain technology. R3 received a whopping $214 million in funding to produce blockchain services for banks. In the 3 years since their founding, they've produced 0 blockchain solutions. They now describe themselves as a blockchain-inspired company. Digital asset holdings, led by JP Morgan's Blythe Masters, for example, were founded as a blockchain company. They raised over $100 million and have quietly pivoted to a DLT startup. And DLT is distributed ledger technology. I don't think you need any more evidence than the emergence of this term, distributed ledger technology. This is a totally made-up word. and it was a convenient excuse, a convenient exit for all of these failed blockchain projects. Another of Bitcoin's copycats are altcoins, tokens, ICOs. You've heard a lot about them today. You may be able to apply blockchain to other problems, but it's like hitting a nail in with a screwdriver. It might work, but it's completely unsuited for the job. I'm running out of time. Zennon needs to speak, so I won't go into all the reasons why these tokens don't work. You can ask me some really difficult questions in a sec. But I will say that blockchain is not a magic wand that you can wave and eliminate the need for middlemen or trust in any system. Its design, expressed in its software, is intended only to avoid the middleman in monetary policy, nothing else. Ultimately, all of these private blockchains and altcoins fail because they require trust. They require you to trust them, usually on the condition that you hand over some of your money first. To date, none of these blockchains have produced any value for you or for the economy. None of their wild claims, we've heard a lot today, have been proven. Ultimately, Bitcoin does not ask you, it does not require you to trust it. Bitcoin is the only successful implementation of blockchain technology. Thank you.
Great. All right, well, thank you, Neil. And to open for the opposition, Zennon, please make your statement.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Neil. Neil brought up the issue of trust. Trust is fundamental for any currency today, whether that be a cryptocurrency or the paper money that you have in your wallet or the Alipay that you use to shop at the supermarket. Trust has been with payments and transactions since the beginning of time. Trust in the beginning was the concept of bartering. You would have a pig, you would trade it for a bushel of corn. Bitcoin came about as a new way to solve the issue of trust. And much like any other technology, when we had the printing press 100 years ago that changed the printing market, when we had the combustion engine that changed the way that we got around town, Bitcoin as a technology is definitely making us rethink the way that we consider currency, monetary systems, and our government. As a decentralized store of value, I think we've seen in the past couple of weeks that Bitcoin certainly has its place. But if you think back to what the original vision of Satoshi Nakamoto was a peer-to-peer cash transmission system, which is far from where we are today. Bitcoin is tethered by political issues, as you saw from one of the previous panels, about whether it should be Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash. It's tethered with transmission issues where there's hundreds, if not thousands, of unconfirmed transactions across the network. Yet as a technology, that blockchain technology that is behind Bitcoin is very useful. Neil mentioned some of the organizations and the banks that are looking at Bitcoin technology. There is a lot of fervor around it in the market. But I think when we look at the applications, they're far wider than just a transmission of money. And in fact, Bitcoin, to a large extent, is a solution, an elegant solution to a problem that doesn't exist. When we look at any kind of money transmission around the world, yes, it may be expensive. I run a small company here in China, and I pay about $40 every time I receive money. Do I have to pay that? No, there are other companies that will do that, and banks can lower the costs. Credit card transactions. Well, we've seen what's happened with credit cards in China, credit and debit in China. It's shifted to frictionless digital payments across Alipay and WeChat Pay. So whilst I don't doubt that the technology behind Bitcoin and Bitcoin itself is very revolutionary, I think the applications of Bitcoin are very narrow. As we're seeing in the past couple of weeks, it has become a good store of value, or has become essentially an asset class. But this is far from the original vision that was envisioned by whoever Satoshi Nakamoto was. So hearing earlier on the stage, on the previous panel, people talk about this Bitcoin becoming a store of value, I could hear Satoshi flipping over in his virtual grave as his vision is distorted into what Bitcoin has become today. Thank you.
Great. Thank you again, Zennon. So I just want to remind everyone that we are asking for questions, so you can join this group chat, and you can ask your questions there. We do have a significant portion of time devoted to that, so it'll be a good chance for you to ask some good questions to these gentlemen about what they really believe and really test their assumptions. But before we do that, I want to hand the floor back over to Mr. Woodfine, who will give a rebuttal from Mr. Kapron.
So I think one of the big questions...
Stand up. You got to stand up.
Sorry?
Stand up.
Stand up?
Yeah, come on.
So I think one of the big questions is whether Bitcoin is meeting the role of cash that it was designed for. I think one of the things that I can definitely agree with is that Bitcoin is not ready for retail transactions right now. One of the reasons that it's not ready is that it's far too volatile. Even if we reduced the cost of transactions, businesses would not choose to use Bitcoin to receive or make payments because they couldn't guarantee the day after it was going to be worth as much as it is today. Another problem right now is that a lot of people don't understand money. We've never learned about it at school. We were never taught about it. But there's some fundamental laws in money. A medium of exchange is a later stage of money. The birth of all monies, whether it's gold or silver or small shells, they all started originally as a store of value. Without the store of value, we cannot reach the medium of exchange. It's impossible. If the currency that you're using, you cannot guarantee that it's valuable in the future, then you will not use it as a medium of exchange. So the store of value is the most important part of Bitcoin. And that's the part that we're getting right now. As you've seen, the value has been increasing like crazy. I have no doubt that we're in a bubble phase right now and it will crash back down and we'll hear from the news that it's failing again. But it has definitely been a reliable store of value for all the holders of Bitcoin over the last few years. So this is what Bitcoin's succeeding in. It cannot compromise the store of value properties to achieve this medium of exchange. However, we are working towards, when I say we, I'm talking about other Bitcoin developers, not myself. The people working on Bitcoin are coming up with solutions to allow us to scale, to reduce the costs of these transactions. But we can't do that unless it maintains its store of value. Also, I'd like to mention that I agree that things like credit cards and Alipay and WeChat are really convenient payment methods. They're great. Bitcoin wallets right now, they totally suck. I mean, they're absolutely awful, every single one of them. But Alipay and WeChat are just a layer on top of the existing banking system. They're actually using a very, very slow settlement method between banks to complete their payments. They're just using a second layer on top to deliver these very fast, very cheap payments. Bitcoin can achieve this. You could build WeChat, you could build Alipay on top of Bitcoin. So this is not a mutually exclusive phenomenon. I'll let you come back to that if you like.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Woodfine. Mr. Kapron, it's your floor.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Neil. I think the concept of running WeChat or WhatsApp or Alipay or any of these systems on Bitcoin is quite interesting. Although I'm not sure I'd want to wait a couple of hours for my chat message to be confirmed by the network, which is, I think, the challenge that Bitcoin is facing at the moment. Look, I think in all of this, the key thing is the people that are sitting in this room, us that are here on stage, people that are at this conference, are outside of what I would call normal society. Now, before you jump on me for saying that in a bad way, I mean, the fact that we're all sitting here at TechCrunch in China means that you are all involved in technology in some way. The concept for you of a digital currency is quite normal. China in general has adopted digital payments, smartphones, way ahead of the technology curve in many different ways. For the rest of the population that isn't at this conference, I use my mother as an example. My mother goes to Walmart or whatever store in the US to buy groceries, and she uses a credit card. And it's very easy, it's very frictionless. It ties into her bank account. It's something that she can easily understand and comprehend. To be fair, Bitcoin is a store of value for people who understand it, but not for those people like my mom who have a passing interest in it. My mom would never put her retirement savings in Bitcoin, although no, I think not even Neil would recommend putting all of your retirement savings into Bitcoin at this point. But that level of understanding of the common person, of the actual user of payment methods, besides the people that are in the room, is the critical aspect that we often fail to forget when we come to conferences like this. We get blinded by blockchain and Bitcoin and technology and the way that's going to change the world for us. And for many of us, it has. On the previous stage, there were a couple millionaires that because of blockchain and ICOs. But for the rest of the population, Bitcoin doesn't solve their problems. And therefore, we need alternate solutions that are based on other blockchain platforms, whether that be quantum or Ethereum or other blockchains that will better suit the needs of the general public beyond blockchain, or beyond Bitcoin, rather.
Great. Well, let's give a big round of applause for Mr. Kapron and Mr. Woodfine. So before we do jump into the Q&A, I think Neil, you wanted to jump in there and say something just now.
Well, I mean, first of all, I'd just like to remind Zennon of the proposition today that the argument is we need other blockchains. It sounds like you don't believe in any blockchains can solve these problems. But one thing that I would like to mention for sure is that you say that Bitcoin doesn't solve problems for anybody in this room. But I can say for certain that everybody, the money that is stored in their bank account 5 years ago can buy a lot less than it could buy 5 years ago. For people that bought Bitcoin 5 years ago, they can buy a lot more with it. In that respect, it has performed far better as a store of value and as money than their existing traditional bank accounts. And in that way, I would suggest that it is solving problems for people today. As well, very recently, we saw the collapse of Venezuela's currency because they put far too much trust in a central authority. And for the Venezuelans, there are people that are using the electricity that's available to them to mine Bitcoins to obtain a reliable store of value. It's solving problems for them too. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. So get to some of your questions. Someone asks. So I think Neil, that you can probably answer this one. So how can Bitcoin survive when forks are inevitable?
So I think the forks give people the option of testing out their own ideas and seeing how much consensus there is for their ideas. But at the same time, we have to look at these forks as no different from any other altcoin apart from their transaction history. Bitcoin Cash, for example, is no different from another altcoin apart from the fact that it has the same transaction history at a certain date as Bitcoin. It's still competing in the market. It's completely different to Bitcoin. And I think the price action over the last few weeks, months, has proven that there's more demand for a system that is far more reliable and isn't willing to take risks with Bitcoin's store of value properties.
Great. So Zennon, so a question for you.
Can I respond to that?
Sorry?
Right, can I respond
Yes,
to that?
of course.
So history books don't really cover. In 1859, there was actually a gold fork that's not very well covered in history books, basically because it didn't happen. And that's one of the key problems with Bitcoin and that we're seeing today is that we're having all these forks because the original implementation doesn't meet the needs of kind of the mass markets and the ability to kind of have a number of transactions that we need to have for it to be viable. And that's why we're seeing all of these forks and alternatives to Bitcoin come onto the market. And to be honest, I think having all of these, it was mentioned in one of the previous panels, competition is good. I mean, competition brings out the best solutions. I mean, we've seen that with beta and VHS back in the VCR days. We've seen that with Blu-ray and other DVD formats. I mean, competition eventually weeds out a lot of the first movers and gets us to a solution that we all agree is kind of the best solution. So we're here with, we've seen a Nokia operating system. We've seen an iOS, we've seen Android, we've seen multiple different operating systems in mobile phones, but now we're kind of centralized around Android and iOS after a lot of permutations in the market. And so I think, there's a lot of blockchain implementations or altcoins or whatever you want to call them that may be good, may be bad, depending on what their original implementation ideas were. But I think that competition that eventually, when we come out the other side, we will see a number of cryptocurrencies that are used on a mass market, but I don't believe it'll be just Bitcoin.
So in money, competition is not good. Because if you have a system where you're having multiple currencies compete against each other, it makes it very difficult to engage in exchanges within the economy. Money is a monopolistic system where it's much better if everybody is using the same currency. And this plays out in monetary history. The whole world trended towards one currency, which was gold, and perhaps silver to a certain extent. when you're trading in China or in the UK, everybody wants to be using one currency. You don't want to be mixing different currencies. It makes it difficult to trade. In terms of demands, the most important demand is that a money stores value. And then after that, you want it also to be decent for exchanging for goods. Bitcoin has solved the store of demand problem and will solve the medium of exchange problem. If it meets both of these requirements, you don't need any other coins. They're just confusing the system, making it very difficult for the economy to function.
Great, great. Sorry. So we want to move on from this point because there's a lot of other stuff to cover. But we can,
good? Yeah, good.
Sure. Maybe we can cover it in your closing statement. But I think what a really good question from the audience for you, Zennon, was what is the most successful use case of blockchain besides Bitcoin, and why?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think we're still at the early days. I mean, Bitcoin, because of the network effects and because it's been around for a while, has become the most successful use of blockchain. There's no way you can argue anything beyond that. I think what Neil said about a lot of the banks getting very excited about blockchain a couple of years ago, certainly banks are our clients, so we see this all of the time. And there's certainly been a little bit more of a rationalization of what blockchain can be used for within a bank. When I worked at Citibank in 2003 in Portugal, one of the processes at the end of the day was to take a floppy disk from one computer, walk it across the office, put it in another computer, and upload the payment file to the central clearing network. That process was then replaced with a modem that connected directly in, followed by a network connection, and maybe even today they're looking at blockchain. But we have to look at this as technology on top of technology. Blockchain is a technology, but that's what it is. So the applications of that are far wider than just using for monetary or a currency. And I think we're only at the start of that. The point around trade, there are some production level blockchain implementations between banks around trade today. Trade, if you're any familiar with the process, involves about 20 different entities and about 10 different sets of paperwork that all need to be moved around, potentially a country, potentially the globe, in addition to the material itself. It's an incredibly complicated process that can be optimized using a blockchain solution. Now, when we get to that those solutions are used globally, who knows, but it is coming.
Cool. So, so a question for you, Neil. So should Bitcoin be used for other types of transaction data other than digital currency, other than as a digital currency?
The problem of using blockchains to transact other types of financial data is that you always have a liability on this other side. Blockchain is very useful for creating a bearer asset. That is to say that if you hold it, you own it. But the problem with doing that with other financial assets, it means that you have this connection of trust with the real world. If I hold this token, that gives me entitlement to this financial tool, but then I have to go to some other third party for them to provide it to me. They may not honor my token. So in this way, blockchain isn't particularly useful for trading these other instruments, because at the end of the day, I have to trust this person or this entity to deliver it to me. And if they don't deliver it to me, then I have to go to the courts. In those kind of instances, you'd be far better using a database run by whichever kind of institution is managing this sale. Because at the end of the day, they're going to tell me whether I get hold of this particular thing that we're selling. You don't need a blockchain for that.
Well, but I'm curious. I mean, so you look at, we heard a bunch from the previous panel before about decentralized applications and things like that. And so is your thesis that we don't need other blockchains to create those, or is it just that we can't trust the people who make them?
So these projects are all built around trust. So when they ask you to give them a very, very large amount of money up front, and they promise to deliver a platform which is going to be useful to you. But you're trusting them to build that platform. And the problem with this is that the incentives are completely front-loaded. For anybody here that's ran a startup, you know how risky it is. Like 99% of startups fail. So if you're running one of these platforms, you've been given a lot of money, you have no kind of incentive to deliver on your promises. And even if you do have incentives to do it, there's a lot of incentives to cut and run. And there's a lot of incentives to pay yourself a very, very high salary to providing the services that you're providing. And then also, I think with the altcoins, these ICOs, you get two different types. You get the utility tokens and you get the securities. The securities are super dangerous. And anybody running these security type ICOs are potentially going to get in a lot of trouble with regulators, looking at jail time and stuff like that. But also, they fail on the trust question, because at the end of the day, you have to trust that they're going to deliver on their security. With the utility tokens, it makes completely no sense, because what they're trying to do is create a medium of exchange. And medium of exchanges, as I've said, trend towards one. You don't need multiple mediums of exchange within an economy. For example, if you were going to use Mobike or Uber, you would prefer not to have to buy Uber tokens which float with their own exchange rate, or buy Mobike tokens to go and use your Mobike. You would far prefer to use your own money, which you know you can trade with other people, to go and purchase whatever goods or services you're buying. So these kind of utility tokens don't make any sense. When people are talking about doing decentralized platforms, they're talking about BitTorrent. BitTorrent is a decentralized platform. You can't shut it down. You can run nodes from any one of your computers. And if any of these kind of decentralized systems have any value, you could build a similar system like that, and you could incentivize people to provide these services, to open their nodes, by getting them to pay in Bitcoin, a medium of exchange that everybody respects.
Interesting. Okay. So Zennon, I mean, it's like, you're on the opposite side of the statement that Bitcoin is enough. You think that Bitcoin is not enough. But where do you see some, from your point of view, what are some good applications of Bitcoin? And where are some areas where you think that it really just does not, or something else needs to be used?
Sure. And I think what's important here is to not conflate ICOs with blockchain, because I think certainly that would be something that we would agree on, is a lot of the money that is going into these ICOs is stupid money, to be honest. I mean, it's going after ideas that have no chance of being successful in the world or have very little thought through. But I think within the blockchain space, there are very many smart minds that are looking at this. I mean, we've talked about trade finance, the applications within trade finance. That's one example. Digitizing assets. When we can digitize assets on a blockchain, we can have better track of them, not just in the trade finance space, but in precious metals, in food products, in other goods and products and services. When you look at assets as well on real estate, even your data as an asset, if that can be put on the blockchain and you be given more control over that. One of the challenges, I don't know, I'm sure everybody here uses Alipay, but I'm not sure if you've actually read the terms and conditions. If you read the terms and conditions, they're very vague in terms of what Alibaba and Ant Finance can do with your data. If we had better control over personal data, it would be much easier for us to use these platforms, and that's something that blockchain can accomplish. So I think there's many different applications within many different subsegments and industries that we're only starting to uncover right now. Certainly within the financial industry, because of the money that's involved in that, that's been one of the key first focus areas. But I think when we look at medical, when we look at advertising, when we look at social media, there are tens, if not hundreds, of use cases of DLT or blockchain, depending on how you want to call it.
Right. Right. Well, I think that's all the time we have for questions. So I now give the floor to Mr. Woodfine to make his closing statement.
Great. So the very same people that have been telling you that blockchain is the future, that it will decentralize all things, the Bloombergs, the economists, the bankers, the consultants, TechCrunch, these are the very same people that have been telling you that Bitcoin will fail for years. How much have they cost their clients? How much have they cost their readers? How smart could they be if they're continuously very, very wrong? Let's assume for a moment that I'm wrong, and that there are some niche use cases for blockchain outside of Bitcoin. I'd like you to think personally how much you're looking forward to being able to track salmon more transparently on a blockchain. How much are you looking forward to exactly the same incumbents being able to trade financial securities in a more transparent way? How does that affect you? Have you ever had a hospital lose your medical records? Have you ever felt like you need more control over your medical records? Now, I want you to think to yourself how much it would affect your life if your savings did not fall in value. if anybody's savings did not fall in value, if your savings were safe regardless of what financial crisis was happening, like in Venezuela. These are issues that will affect you on a daily basis. They will affect your families, they will affect your businesses. These are issues that Bitcoin and blockchain were built to solve. Blockchain is a super difficult subject. It's full of buzzwords. I don't expect to have changed many of your minds today, especially after I saw the vote coming into this. Instead, I hope I've equipped you with more intellectual tools to assess the claims that these people are making. After our debate today, I recommend that you look closely at the evidence as it unfolds. Watch as these blockchain projects and these ICO projects fail one after the other, and watch as Bitcoin continues to succeed against all the odds. There's a revolution happening, and it's changing the world. That revolution is Bitcoin, not blockchain. I hope you're paying attention.
Thank you.
I love the way that Bitcoin has succeeded because it's worth $10,000. That success, how do we measure that? What does that mean? That means anybody who holds Bitcoin is a little bit richer, but how does that mean success for us in general as a society? I would argue it doesn't. It means that an asset that certain people believe has value has increased to a point that they are richer, and they've become wealthier because of their prescience to buy into it a month ago, 2 months ago, a couple of years ago. That's not success for us as a society. That's success for a small subset of the people. The real success will come from putting your salmon on the blockchain, from putting your apartment on the blockchain. These may not be things, as Neil said, that affect you directly, but they will affect you. And that's the future. As is with many things, many technologies, I couldn't explain to you how a 4G network works, but I know it works, and I know I benefit from it. Although it doesn't affect me directly, it affects me in my daily life. And so when we look forward on Bitcoin and blockchain, and we think about this so-called success that Bitcoin has had, let's keep that in mind. That the success is really not the success of a particular asset, a Shanghai apartment. Shanghai apartments are now 120,000 per square meter on average. Is that success for the Shanghai property market? In the same way, is this success for Bitcoin? Real success in the future and real change in the future will come from the technology underneath Bitcoin and not Bitcoin itself. Thank you.
Well, great. Another big thank you to both gentlemen for taking the time to come and make some very cogent arguments on both sides. So, if you remember, before we got started, basically no one was on the side of the proposition. I think we had like two or three people, if I remember correctly. We had a bit more people on the opposition. So now, I'm going to ask, so what do you think now? After you've heard the arguments, after you've heard the back and forth between them, after you've heard their points, what do you think now? So,
come on, guys. Give me a few hands.
No lobbying. So, who agrees with the proposition? Bitcoin is enough. We don't need other blockchains. Who agrees? Okay. So a few more people. So more than 3 people. Okay. So who agrees with the opposition? Bitcoin is not enough. We need other blockchains. Okay. So I would say that the opposition takes it. Congratulations. All right, great. Well, thanks.